Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother Herman L Herrnstein with the Mundopay Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture. I am here once again, this time a little earlier than normal and in the middle of the week, kind of, to bring you an additional lesson as it regards the topic, this ongoing debate that I've been having for 20 years. Regarding the meaning of the place name Kemet in the ancient Egyptian records. And a question was brought up recently by Dr. Ditka Kilimanjaro of the Kemet Press. And this is in response, this video is in response to his questions. So given that his questions were very loaded in terms of what is needed to explain it, instead of responding very longly on Facebook, I decided to do this video so that, you know, you can watch it, of course, on your own time, and it'll be easier to find, and it'll be easier for me to explain, because now I can give you visuals of what it is that is needed to answer that type of question. So I don't want to waste too much time. I just want to get into it. So we'll get into what he asked and how all of this plays into this particular debate. So let me do one thing first. Bing. Then I gotta go and share my screen. So peace to everyone who's in the chat room and everyone who's listening live. I know, again, it's in the middle of the day, so not too many live viewers, but that's not the point. The point is just to have it out there and ready for you. So again, I'm not going to waste any more time sharing the screen. And so I'm going to do a full screen view here. And then I can get on with this particular discussion. So, peace to Brother Sean, peace to Bibio, who's in the chat room. Let me check one more thing before I get lost in the sauce. Okay, so today's lesson is called tp-Hsb, the correct method in the debate on the meaning of Kemet. And you'll see why this is titled as such. Oh, I forgot, this isn't a slideshow, this is a PDF. Okay, so before I get started, I want to do a shameless plug real quick, and that is regarding my current class. There is no set amount of time you start when you start, so you can start today or you can start tomorrow. The classes are set up for your self-pacing, and so I'm offering an introduction to linguistics course, a crash course. It's 8 weeks. And, these are the texts that, we're using. You can get more information on my website at www.asarmhotep.com. There's an actual direct link in the description of this very video. So in the future, I plan on doing an introduction to historical comparative linguistics in 2 parts. So there's going to be a part 1 and a part 2. So stay tuned for that, and so we'll just move forward. So on Facebook, Dr. Kilimanjaro made this series of statements and questions for which sparked this conversation. So he's been following the debates that Neb and I and others have had on Facebook. So, so this is, you know, his statement that was made, I think yesterday. So he says, some have asked me to weigh in on the recent meta-nature debates and contests on Facebook around the meaning of the term Kemet. I will continue to withhold comment on that topic until I have definitive evidence either way. But I do have a procedural concern and question with the use of comparative analysis in language. How is it that different folk using the same so-called comparative analysis come up with such distinctly different conclusions, with both calling it scientific? This is quite disturbing. As an applied research scientist, for me, that just cannot exist. A clean, documented, exact, accurate, step-by-step process must be presented for meta-nature comparative analysis. I have yet to see this, so I get very little from the debates. And so he raised a number of good points and questions. And so, you know, we have two camps, you know, Neb and I, for example. We have two opposite conclusions, but both are claiming to use a proper methodology as it regards this particular subject. And so what I'm here to show and demonstrate is that we're not using the same methodology. Neb is, how should I say? He's attempting, he's still in the process of trying to learn how this is done. And he's jumped out there making these extravagant arguments, but he doesn't know the process and theories behind certain methods that are used in this field to answer questions. And so for a layperson, it'll seem as if Neb is saying something significant and important. And, you know, once you get familiar with the methods, then you'll see that, no, he's not using scientific methods. And I'm not sure he's even familiar with scientific methods and methodology at all. And so this is what we attempt to demonstrate in this particular video. So, so we're just going to get started. And so, of course, we always start off with the theoretical framework. And so, again, we have been having this ongoing discussion on the meaning of Kemet for quite some time. And so I try to, as much as possible, you know, introduce to the laypersons certain issues in terms of methodology and conjecture that they may not be familiar with. But of course, when you're doing a video or if you're having a conversation on Facebook, it's hard to bring about this in a systemized way because the platforms don't really allow in a timely and meaningful way to get through all these details before we can even get into the meat of the discussion. And so this is why, for example, Dr. Ditka is unable to see the step-by-step methods. In order for him to really understand that, he would have to take courses on linguistics and philology. And so, you know, before having this debate, you would have to have that background. And there's a reason for that. So that's why I try to introduce some things. So even though if you haven't that background, you can at least follow it. And so what we're essentially doing here is kind of bringing up the comparative method. But before we get to the comparative method, I want to get to the scientific method. And so we'll see how this is being done in this particular discussion, at least on my side. And so, you know, there's, depending on what type of research you're doing, there's really no set agreed upon standard of the scientific method as in regards to what steps goes first. And that's more so in the middle of, and you'll see what I mean by the middle of the procedures. But this is fairly representative, what you see on your left-hand side, of the comparative method, excuse me, the scientific method. And so it is, when we're talking about the scientific method, we're talking about a methodology for knowledge acquisition that eliminates chance and bias in the process of discovery. And so there's a few steps that you have to adhere to in order for it to be considered scientific in this day and age. And so usually what happens is you ask a question or there's an observation. And from there, you do a background research. Okay, so let me see if there's any scientists, any researchers who have dealt with this problem before, and let's see what they have come up with, if anything. If your research does not provide you with a definitive answer, then one needs to come up with their own hypothesis to try to explain what is not obviously explained in the literature review. So you construct the hypothesis in terms of the next phase. So then from there, you test with experiments. And so science is based on experimentation and falsifying hypotheses. You want to prove your hypothesis wrong. If it can withstand scrutiny, then it is more than likely the truth. And so there's some other steps that we have to go through, of course, during this process of testing. And so we ask the question, is the procedural working? No or yes. If no, troubleshoot procedure, carefully check all steps, and set up and repeat the experiment. If it is working, then we analyze the data and draw conclusions. Now, if our conclusions result align with the hypothesis, of course, we always communicate our results. But if it doesn't align with our hypothesis, only partially, this becomes the basis for new experimentation. And so we go through this process several times and from several angles to make sure that we have that we're on the right path as far as this particular hypothesis and research question is concerned. And so when it comes to this meaning of Kemet, we have to understand that up until this point of me actually writing this chapter for this upcoming book, no one has went through the process of the scientific method as it regards answering these questions on the meaning of Kemet. There was an assumption, there was a hypothesis made, but instead of any testing, they instead just went with the hypothesis as if the hypothesis was true. And so our research question is, what is the meaning and etymology of the place name Kemet in the ancient Egyptian language? When we do the background research, otherwise called the literature review, we come to discover there's two main hypotheses for the meaning of Kemet. And so one school of thought argues black land. The other school of thought argues black people. However, if we were doing this scientifically, every hypothesis is mirrored, is complemented by what we call the null hypothesis. And that is that there is no relation between the variables in the hypothesis. And so if people were doing this scientifically, they would understand that there's another hypothesis that they would have to falsify. And that is that Kemet doesn't equal black land or Kemet doesn't equal black people. So you have actually 4 hypotheses that we have to test. First hypothesis, Kemet equals black land. Second hypothesis, Kemet doesn't equal black land. Third hypothesis, Kemet equals black people. Fourth hypothesis, Kemet doesn't equal black people. And so if we discover that Kemet doesn't mean black land or black people, then we still have to discover what it means. So you have to have a methodology to discover and not what the true meaning is without the preconceived notion that the word actually means black in the first place. It could mean something else. So how do we eliminate these hypotheses? That's the fundamental question. And so we'll continue. Excuse me as I take a sip. Okay, so how do we prove a word's meaning? Right? By what means can we demonstrate that a word, and if you remember from my previous discussions, this is the way that I mathematically discuss a particular word or a morpheme in my comparative analysis. And so this is just this phi, sub A1 or A sub 1, A sub 2, etc., going to AN. It's just a word with a particular string of consonants and vowels. So it's just a word. So by what means can we demonstrate that a word, whatever that word is, you can just fill in and substitute, has some meaning X? How can we discover the meaning of a lexical item whose semantic associations are unknown, therefore solving for X? So this is for if we are to discover that Kemet doesn't equal black land or Kemet doesn't equal black people. Well, how do we go about discovering what the true meaning is? So we first start off with the assumption that we don't know what the meaning is. And so we're gonna go through step by step to discover what the meaning is. So in this process, we have 3 fundamental steps. We can look at the word under question, and its various usages in primary text. In other words, what is the context surrounding a word's placement in a sentence or paragraph? So we have to go to the primary data, the primary text, to see how the word is being used. What's the grammar in the sentence? What other clues give us a hint to what's being referenced by the word? 2, by comparing that term to cognates in related languages with the same consonantal structure. And so this is how we're going to represent the consonantal, that these are cognates. So these are 2 words in 2 different languages. So phi for us is going to be the Egyptian language, and theta is going to be some other language for which we're comparing. So after we've done a contextual analysis, then we can go on and examine the words in related languages, even if we still don't know what the word means, because we have a process to discover it. But first we have to establish what are cognates. So in the case of Egyptian lexical items, we also incorporate the terminating classifiers at the end of the lexical item, whatever word we're looking at, in this case Kemet, with unknown meaning X. So we look at the consonantal structure in the basis of the word and compare it in other languages, and we double check by looking at the classifiers for the word in Egyptian. And so my last video conversation had to deal with the classifiers, so I won't get into too much detail with that. I have a whole video on it. So going through the literature review. Now, some of this will be a repeat from the actual debate, but most of the debate slides I took out. And so, it won't be a direct repeat. So, but this is from the initial debate. So we have, for example, the first school, and this is just representative. This is James P. Allen's in his 2010 work, Middle Egyptian: An Introduction to the Language and Culture of Hieroglyphs. He says that the word Kemet, Egypt, literally means black, referring to the soil of the Nile Valley, CSA2. This is why Egyptian uses the preposition her on rather than in. Her Kemet means literally on the black land. And so this is typical of the standard Egyptological references that you're going to see, is that the word means literally black land. And so when he's talking about her Kemet, he's actually referencing a citation in which he was discussing in the book, but it's not necessary now. But just to get you to understand that this is, no matter where you go in Egyptology, this is the definition of Kemet given primarily in the mainstream school of Egyptology. So with hypothesis 2, we at least have a direct source of that, and that comes from Dr. Chacon Cydia. And so it actually goes back, to 1974 at the UNESCO conference. He puts a formal argument in his 1977 work on the genetic relationship between Egypt and modern Black African languages. And so, but there is in English a part of his argument that's in the book Great African Thinkers, Chacon Cydia, edited by Ivan van Sertima. So on pages 46 through 48, starting on page 46, Chacon Cydia says the Egyptians had only one term to designate themselves, Kemet, the Negroes, literally. I should say off the bat that this is false, because the word they used to reference themselves is remech, which is a word for people. And there are some other words that they use to reference themselves. And so this notion that this is the only term used to reference them is erroneous. But I don't even deal with that in this lecture, but I just wanted to make that known. So he's saying that the word Kemet actually means black people, quote unquote, the Negroes, literally. We continue. In the Egyptian language, a word assembly is formed from an adjective or a noun by putting it in the feminine singular. Kemet from the adjective Kem, black. It therefore means strictly Negroes, or at the very least black men. The term is a collective noun which thus describes the whole people of pharaonic Egypt as a black people. And so, again, he argues that Kemet means black people, and he introduced another part of the argument, and he said that it is from that there's a, let me slow down, that there's a feminine singular of the word, and this somehow makes it a collective noun, so which thus describe the whole people of pharaonic Egypt as black people. And so this is Chacon Cydia. Now, as I noted in the first discussion, there's faulty logic in Chacon Cydia's premises. So his initial, I told you the first one, and that was just totally false, that the Egyptians only reference themselves by Kemet. That is not the case. They reference themselves as remech. Kemet referred to the place, but we'll get into that. But regarding his particular argument, he says a word of assembly, this is the first premise. A word of assembly is formed from an adjective or a noun by putting it in the feminine singular. His second premise, Kemet from the adjective Kem equals black. Conclusion, it therefore means strictly Negroes, or at the very least black men. I charge Diop and basically everyone on this question. It's the begging the question fallacy. And this argument is fallacious, talking about Diop's, and I can say James P. Allen's as well, in part because it does not offer an independent reason for the claim he is trying to support, the dependency problem. In other words, Diop is trying to support something by supposing prove what he has yet to prove. So neither James P. Allen or Chacon Cydia ever tries to prove that the root of the word Kemet is Kim, meaning black. There was just an assumption by Egyptologists made on this, and then Chacon Cydia took their assumptions and just applied it differently. But neither Diop, Obenga, James P. Allen, Gardner, Hawk, any of these individuals ever proved that this is the case. And so this is what I mean by on this question, it has been done unscientifically, because they had a hypothesis, but they did not do any kind of experimentation to confirm their hypothesis. And so that's what I had to do in my research. So what I want to read here is to demonstrate that this goes on a lot in linguistics. And you have people making hypotheses about stuff, but never demonstrating in a scientific way that their hypothesis is true. And this is something that Dr. Mundopay Oduyoye, in his book, Words and Meaning in Yoruba Religion, Connections Between Semitic, Ancient Egyptian, or Yoruba, Ancient Egyptian, and Semitic. And so on pages 44 and 45 of this text, he says this regarding the Kwa, so-called sub-branch of Niger-Congo languages, or the language phylum. And so he says, all the detailed search for near relationships within Kwa languages has not produced a single full-dress exposition or proof of the genetic relationship of the Kwa languages. Or can anyone cite any publication in which the relationship of Yoruba and Edo, Benin, for example, has been conclusively proved? Or the relationship between Yoruba and Idoma? Or are we to take these on trust? We are not suggesting that these languages are not related. What we are saying is that those who are asserting the inadequacy of the evidence available for the relationship between Yoruba and the Semitic and Ancient Egyptian languages speak as if, in comparison, the evidence for the relationship within the family of Kwa languages is copious. Up to date, it is not. There is a tacit assumption that detailed proof is unnecessary in this area, but it is. It is necessary to provide a model of what is considered to be sufficient proof of genetic relationship between languages in West Africa. The onus for providing this model rests on the skeptics. And so what he's saying here is that, there are folks who go around talking about these certain relationships, but never, ever, ever, ever once going through the process of demonstrating that relationship using the scientific and comparative methods. And so this is the heart of the basis of the arguments, for example, against Nilo-Saharan, Niger-Congo, Afro-Asiatic, Khoisan. None, not one of these phylums has been scientifically demonstrated to exist. They are hypotheses. Yet you have a slew of literature written with commentary and things as if this has been demonstrated and is the case. And so us as scientists, or I at least as a scientist, cannot accept people's hypotheses as facts without some kind of definitive proof and demonstration. And the Africanist school is full of research like that. And when you try to correct people who don't understand linguistics, don't understand science, that this is in fact a case, they go into cognitive dissonance and try to defend points that they never understood in the first place. So, I just wanted to give that example. So this also, on page 43, this excerpt from the same citation comes to speak on indirectly what is the issue with the meaning of the word Kemet, even though this is not what he's trying to argue here. But for example, he says another example of the limitation which a structuralist commitment imposed on Professor Bosa's attempt was a preliminary decision never to adduce words from any other language besides Yoruba. Dialect forms were cited, but to cite words from another language, from other languages, was considered to be wandering away from the field of Yoruba studies. Structural linguistics invade against the practice of explaining one language in terms of another. Structuralists believe that the full explanation of a language lies within that language. This is an illusion, and it is this illusion which separates the methods of Saussurean linguistics, therefore comparative linguistics, from the methods of classical philology. Structuralism is monolingual, and a monolingual approach to etymology will always end up in folk etymology. In other words, the wrong answer. You cannot fully explain words simply by looking at words in the same language. This is why we go and use the comparative method. This is why for the African centered scholars of Egyptology all have background in linguistics. So we can confirm or disconfirm, the meanings and applications of these words, the sentence structure, grammar, and all of that in the language of ancient Kemet, because languages are not islands unto themselves. They belong to families. They have cousins, sisters, brothers, and they all have similar features in the family. So this is how we get to the bottom of things. We go to outside languages, but we first analyze what we can in the single language that we're examining, and then we do other tests outside. And so this is why, Dr. Ditka, we do the comparative method when it comes to this question. And so I would demonstrate that Netterneb never did the comparative method. He did some what we call group matching, or mass comparison. So we'll continue. So now, before we get into the detailed steps of the comparative method itself, I would like to introduce this text. This is a chapter out of this text. It's a text in German. And it is titled Old Egyptian and Pre-Old Egyptian, Tracing Linguistic Diversity in Archaic Egyptian and the Creation of the Egyptian Language. And so I think he did a pretty good job in this text, although it's clear that he's missing some data because he doesn't do a full-scale analysis. But, and it appears as if he's trying to introduce, some Caucasians into the mix, into the development of ancient Kemet. But outside of that, he brings some arguments and questions that I myself have brought up, Dr. Muba Benge Bololo has brought up, as well as Jean-Claude Mboli in his 2010 text on the origins of African languages. And so, this, text is worthy to be discussed for, its strengths and limitations, its weaknesses. But in this particular, on this particular page, he's talking about he's answering the question, how can you determine the relatedness of two languages? And, and the discovery of particular words and things of that nature. And so these three criterion is what he proposes. And so he is a linguist as well, and Egyptologist. So he says first, there are not only roots or word stems which are similar in shape and meaning, but both systems also exhibit similar sets of stem extensions and or derivative affixes used on the same basis. So besides the roots of the words, because we primarily compare roots, when we're doing a comparative analysis. Not only will the roots find correspondences, but the grammatical and morphological features attached to the words will find correspondence. So that is something that we need to look at when we're trying to discover the meaning or cognate for Kemet in ancient Egyptian language as compared to some other languages. So not only should the roots match, but the extensions on the root should match. So we should know what is the root of Kemet and what is a grammatical the grammatical morpheme of the word Kemet, if there is one attached to it. So then he talks about a particular lexemes exhibit particular lexemes exhibit formally similar suppletive stems in both systems. I won't get into what suppletive stems are, because that takes us beyond what we need to understand here. But just briefly, if I'm looking at a language and I have, for example, the words better and best, if I can find these suppletive stems in a related language in that same fashion, that they have, for example, in their word for their cognate for better, that it has a suffix er on it, and that they have a word best in the same type of relationship as we do in English, then that lets us know that this is strong evidence for a relationship between these two languages. So now, and then the third one, which is important, in either system, there are similar groups of semantically distinct lexemes which share the same phonological shape, or matching groups of phonological distinct lexemes having the same meaning. So, for example, roots of the consonantal shape ML serve to express the semantic concepts black, sing, and weak in Indo-European, as well as in Egyptian. Since there are no apparent universal conceptual resemblance, since there is no apparent universal conceptual resemblance between black, sing, and weak, the probability that two distinct languages denote these meanings by means of the same root independently from each other is extremely small. So in other words, both in Egyptian and Indo-European, there is a root that with the same consonant sequence ML. And this ML, regardless of the vowels, there's a sequence in both Indo-European and Egyptian that means black, sing, and weak. And so there's no correlation between black, between sing, and between weak. These are different words, different concepts. So if we're comparing, saying these words, and each one of these words exists with an ML consonant sequence in both languages, then we have strong evidence of a relationship, because it's highly unlikely that they're going to borrow the all the ML sequenced words, saying from one language to another. And so that's what he's saying here. And so I'm going to repeat this throughout our discussion. So keep this in mind. I'm going to repeat this. And so this is going to guide us in determining, the right word, the right meaning for the word Kemet. And so in a similar fashion, Brother Herman L Herrnstein, in his book, Black Sumer, The African Origins of Civilization, it's a linguistic analysis which demonstrates the relationship between the Sumerian and the Proto-Bantu languages, or the Bantu language groups. And so what he's saying is that Proto-Bantu and Sumerian belong to the same family in proto-language. And so in the process of methods here, he has this to say. So it's in two parts. So on page 42, he says, it should be emphasized that cognancy is based on recurrent sound correspondences and not sound resemblance. We can illustrate this with the English word heart, which has an identical sound to the German word heart. I should have put this in a single quotes, but this is chance resemblance. Even though English and German are related, this does not automatically make them cognates. We know it is a chance resemblance because the German heart is actually cognate with the English word hard. We know they are cognate because the observed recurrent sound correspondence of German T is with English D. So for every German, for every English D, in German is going to be T. And so that's how we know that heart is not, because is not cognate with heart in this situation here, even though because it would be two T's that would be corresponding, and but that's not the case here. And so recurrent sound correspondences are the only way to demonstrate genetic relationships between languages. They exclude chance resemblances, and that's all the comparative methods is intended to do. Besides the establishment of the so-called sound laws, is to eliminate chance, because in science we're dealing with probabilities, and we want to eliminate noise in the data. And so we have to eliminate chance correspondence or chance and bias in our analysis. That's why we have a scientific method and particular procedures that eliminate that. So the linguistic researcher, for example, Fallacy, has devised what we shall call the repeat initial consonant correspondence test, with a view to excluding chance by quick inspection of a word list. And so he just goes by usually the first consonant as a preliminary step, you know, to going into the comparative method. And so that really to me is insufficient. And so now we get into the second part. So on page 46, he says some languages are, however, dominated by roots which have a consonant vowel, CV, or consonant vowel consonant structure, CVC. This means that finding a four consonant paradigm in basic vocabulary after the manner suggested by Nichols, who he was discussing previously, who I did not quote, would be almost impossible in comparison of two consonant vowel consonant languages. There will be many two consonant paradigms, but not four consonant paradigms. Such languages, however, tend to have a high number of homophonous roots or homonyms. That is, roots which have the same sounds, but two or more unconnected meanings, like the ML sequence that we saw above, cited by Camerzell regarding Indo-European and ancient Egyptian. So if a CVC root with the exact same two unconnected meanings is found in a second language with recurrent sound correspondences, then this is a four consonant paradigm. This kind of evidence is probative or individual identifying because it is very unlikely to occur by chance. Again, we're stuck on this chance. We want to eliminate chance. It is or coincidence, to say it in a different word. It is also very unlikely that a CVC or a consonant vowel consonant roots, two unconnected meanings of basic vocabulary, would both be borrowed by another language. In this way, the repeated two consonant paradigm was devised by the present author, having been inspired by the work of Nichols. Now, I don't know if he actually means this is like he invented this, because this is not the case. I've been using this for years. Of course, Camerzell's essay and pretty much everybody else, where you're kind of forced for this. And so, excuse me. So we're going to be primarily looking at two consonants in sequence and lining them up and seeing if we can create two putative cognate sets in our process of discovering what the root what the meaning of Kemet is. And so this is the standard procedure in this process of comparative linguistics. And so so now we get into, you know, linguistics and what is linguistics. Besides the of course the scientific study of language and things, when it comes to historical comparative linguistics, I want to put this on your mind, that it is discrete mathematics. And mathematics is the scientific study of patterns. Thus, the historical comparative linguistics is the scientific study of diachronic linguistic patterns and the relationships between linguistic phenomena. And I want to stress this and put this on your mind, that we're searching for patterns. So you heard me say, for example, in my last discussion on the classifiers, that we want to look for 3 or more occurrences of this sound sequence, for example, like the ML that we saw above, because 3 actually sets up a pattern. So, you know, if you see one incidence of something, that doesn't mean anything, because that it could be interpreted as coincidence, chance. 2 is interesting, but once you see it 3 times, it's like, wait a minute, there's definitely a pattern here. And it becomes, of course, when you have 5 or more, you have eliminated chance as an explanation for the reoccurring sound meaning correspondences that you're seeing. So this is why this process in science is included in linguistics, which for me is mathematics, because we're the scientific study of patterns is what we're concerned with. So in mathematics, for example, we notice certain patterns like this. So for conjecture, a conclusion based on inductive reasoning. So we see in this first row here, we have the number 1, which equals 1. And this has to deal with odd numbers. So what is the sum? You know, can we create an explanation for the sum of odd numbers and the patterns and relationships of these sums? So we have 1 equals 1. So we know the next one in line is 3. So sum means plus in terms of addition. So 1 plus 3 equals 4. And then the next odd number in line is 5. So 1 plus 3 plus 5 equals 9. And then the next one in the line is 7. 1 plus 3 plus 5 plus 7 equals 16. So what is the pattern that we're noticing here as far as these conclusions are concerned? What's the relationship? How can we write this differently than writing all of this out here? So we would do it like this. So you notice that what is here is it, you know, a series of 1, 2, 3, you know, foregoing, etc. Of the numbers squared. So 1 here is 1 squared, but 4 is also 2 squared. So 2 times 2 is 4. 9 is 3 squared. 16 is 4 squared. This is a pattern we're seeing. So the sum of odd numbers is equal to the amount of odd numbers we have squared. And so this is what we're concerned with in mathematics. What are the patterns and how can we explain the patterns in this? So in linguistics, we also look for patterns. And so this is an example from my upcoming book. And I'm comparing here Proto-Bantu, Sumerian, Chacon, or Egyptian. And this column here is the correspondences, the sound correspondences. And so you can see where I have highlighted here, because we're focused on the consonants at this moment, that when we go down the line of these words, this is the series of words, the 2 consonant method that we were talking about, because that's what these languages are primarily: consonant, vowel, consonant, consonant, vowel, consonant, consonant, vowel, consonant. And so you got to know what the prefixes are so you don't count them, or suffixes. So we'll just take this first line. Bad, to shine. Bab, bar, be white. It's partial reduplication. And so, it's just a feature in African languages when you reduplicate something. It denotes intensity. So from this notion of shining, it's shining, shining, shining. It's 3 times. And so that's what they use for the word to be white, to be this intense shining. And then in Egyptian, wibin, to shine, to rise of the sun. And so they have a prefix here, but we're only concerned with the roots. So we notice that Proto-Bantu B corresponds to Sumerian B and to Egyptian B. But the second consonant, D, in Proto-Bantu corresponds to R in Sumerian and N in ancient Egyptian. We see that for the second and third correspondences sets. But in Sumerian, R's and L's interchange and correspond with each other. So we would expect to see D corresponding with L as well. So we set up 3 here. That's the pattern. And so we do some more over here. So, and so within this same context, there's another variant where the R changes to L, in a different word. So to flee and fear. So to release, free, to reveal, to spread out, to cover means to leave. So in Egyptian, to escape, to depart. This word bui, stone, abale, a type of stone, benwit, hard stone, kern. It lets us know here that we're missing something. We're missing a consonant in Proto-Bantu for this word, but it's recovered in this other reconstruction here. But you see, in Baal type of stone, ben, sacred stone. So when you hear about the ben stone, this is these are the cognates for the ben stone in Sumerian and Proto-Bantu. And so even this word rain, it doesn't have a cognate in Sumerian, but in Chacon, it's the word benin, to overflow, to swell. And so it didn't rain much. So this concept of this downpour of water is transferred to the swelling of the river, because that's where they got their water from. So what we write in terms of this formula here is if P, or P implies Q and Q implies R. So B in Proto-Bantu implies Sumerian B, and Sumerian B implies Egyptian B. We can do this for any of these. Proto-Bantu D implies Sumerian R, that's what we see here, and Sumerian R implies Egyptian N. That's what they're saying here. And so there's a principle called transitivity. And so in mathematics, if A equals or implies B and B implies C, then A implies C. So if B in Proto-Bantu implies Sumerian B and Sumerian B implies Egyptian B, then Proto-Bantu B implies Egyptian B. So I hope y'all get this. And so this is the principle of transitivity. And we do this with all the consonants and vowels when we start dealing with vowels. And you notice most of the vowels in the first vowel position are back vowels, A and U. So that's telling, with the exception of here, this is the front vowels. But that will be important, in the reconstruction process, which we're not going to be involved in here. So now we go back to the method, the scientific method. So, what's our research question? What is the meaning and etymology of the place name Kemet in ancient Egyptian language? The literature review says that there's 2 primary hypotheses, the black land and black people for Kemet. But since we're being scientific, we also include the null hypothesis, that it does not equal black land or black people. So establishing the formulas. So you remember from the first conversation, I created these, as I said, I created them. This is kind of standard in computational linguistics when we're trying to represent language features and lexical items in the computer process in terms of representing these ideas formally and more rigorously. And so, you know, the first thing we have to define is a cognate. What is a cognate? It is a word or a morpheme that is related to a word or morpheme in sister languages by reason of these two words or morphemes having been inherited by the related languages from a common word morpheme of the proto-language from which they descend. So they have to descend from the same parent language, and then there's a process for how we discover that. So you got a taste of it in the previous slides. And so cognate set is a set of cognates, cognate words or morphemes, a set of words related to one another in the sister languages because they are inherited and descended from a single word morpheme of the proto-language. So when we go back here, this is a cognate set. This is a series of cognates with the same consonant sequence or its reflex reflected in the columns, in the sets. So I can pull out of, you know, now that I've established this, I can now pull out of this row, for example, and say that Proto-Bantu Badik, flee, fear, is cognate with Egyptian Benu, to escape, to depart. I can only claim that these two are cognates, or these three are cognates, if I'm able to create cognate sets like this. So I am, because we are there, therefore I am. A cognate is only a cognate in a set of other cognates. So this is a part of the method that we have to understand and do. And this is something that Netterneb was unable to do. And so this is just my mathematical way of representing two cognates. You know, language A with its meaning and language B with its meaning and several. So this is how we would write this mathematically. And so I won't go into these details because I already put this in the first lecture. So I'm gonna skip through this, but just to show you, it's just another fancier way of doing what we did in terms of those the tables that we saw earlier. And so this is just here for you to pause if you need and look over. I explained this in the first video in terms of a morpheme. You know, a root is a morpheme as well. And so, but this is just, you know, a particular proposition which says it should be observed that the postulation of a Chiena into morpheme requires that both the formal and semantic equations match. Therefore, two morphemes, which you see here, are identical only if both the proposition that both form and meanings are true. So we use propositional logic in computational linguistics. And so, you know, this formula was created to more precisely articulate what makes a cognate. And so these are postulations or arguments. And so this formula here reads P if and only Q. And so what is P and what is Q? P is this formula. P is arguing that a word in language A is cognate to a word in language B. You know, with the similar or the same consonantal structure and similar or the same meanings. So P argues that these two words are cognate. Q is a summary of other equations. And so remember, in computer science, all we care about is whether an argument is true or not. And so what we're saying is that R and S have to be true, and T and U have to be true. So all of these values have to be true in order to equal P. And so what is R and S and T and U? R is form, that the two words in language A that match in language B in terms of form. And then S in this equation here is that the meanings are the same or similar, approximate. So in other words, this is a fancy way of saying form and meaning. So a cognate must stand on two legs. But remember what I said earlier, that a cognate, you can't argue that these are cognates unless you're able to demonstrate that these belong to a series of cognates, two cognate sets. And so that's what T is, a cognate set. It's saying that there exists a cognate set, you know, where Z equals 5. And so Z is, you know, in computer programming, we do plus plus I or something like that to denote increase, you know, in terms of whatever kind of variable, whatever kind of calculation we're doing. So it's the next one in a series. So, you know, so this represents a series of words with the same consonantal structure, you know, in a set. So that's all it is. So so this equation here equals what we see here. So that's all it is. That it exists. That this table is actually true and everything is valid. So that's all that equation means. So we're going to skip down again. And so phi, you know, in this equation, or excuse me, U is just simply saying the meanings must match the classifiers. And so we get into the classifiers a little later, and omega equals the classifiers in the ancient Egyptian. And so phi for us is going to represent the ancient Egyptian. So, you know, we have to be clear and precise when we're talking about what a cognate is. And so all of these things have to be true in order for two words that are selected from the compared languages to be cognates. So I'm hoping I'm clear on that. And so this is when we talk about the comparative method, this is what we're talking about. And so it's a series of steps in establishing the relationship between two or more languages. And so the first step is to assemble cognates, to create a cognate set list. And from there, you establish the sound correspondences, the so-called sound laws. From there, you reconstruct the proto-sound based on your analysis of the putative cognate sets. Step 4, you determine the status of similar partially overlapping correspondences sets. So there's many sets that you have to do. And so set theory in mathematics comes to mind with this. So step 5, check the plausibility of the reconstructed sound from the perspective of the overall phonological inventory of the proto-language. And so that's a little something that's bigger and deeper, but you know, there's a particular type of inventory, there's a particular type of correspondences even within the language in terms of what sounds go together, and they're coming in particular sets. But that's above and beyond what we're going to be discussing here. But step 6 is to check the plausibility of the reconstructed sound from the perspective of linguistic universals and typological expressions. So, you know, you not only do your reconstructions and reconstruct words and things of that nature, but you see what is plausible by testing your reconstructions against other living languages, which you have not looked at in your initial analysis. And so in step 7 is to reconstruct individual morphemes. So when we talk about the comparative method, this is the comparative method, you know, in terms of its overall steps. So Michael Weiss in his text adds a little something for us that is meaningful here. The first step in applying the comparative method is formulating a hypothesis that the given languages to be compared are in fact descended from a common source. It obviously makes little sense to apply the comparative method to languages that evidently aren't related. at any reasonable time depth. And the failure of the procedure to reveal any regularity of correspondences, remember, we're looking for patterns. So we're looking for any regularity, that means regular set of correspondences, sound meaning correspondences, would be a strong argument against a theory of genetic common origin. Thus, the comparative method, strictly speaking, is not a method for generating relationship hypothesis. You don't generate a hypothesis based on it. You set the hypothesis first, but rather it is a crucial tool for either confirming or not confirming such hypotheses. So, Brother Ditka, this is why we do the comparative method. And so if we have a hypothesis, for example, that Kemet equals black land or Kemet equals black people, we have to do a comparative analysis to confirm or disconfirm these hypotheses. So this is the way and this is the method in which we do it. So I'm hoping this is clear. So understanding the problem. So as we stated, I've shown this 1,000 times. The ancient Egyptian does not record its vowels to our knowledge. And we can see just from this example from the College language that if we were to take the vowels out of the words on the left-hand column, that they would look similar to us. And we would have no way of determining what word is which because we don't have the vowels. And so it would be erroneous, for example, to say that Kemet, KMT, in every example here, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 examples of KMT, that all of them mean, for example, nape or the back of the neck. We clearly have other examples, one meaning to find power, another one to become strong, which may be related to that one, the late, the deceased, and his, her, its mother. So it would be erroneous on me just to pick one randomly and then start making arguments based on why, me just randomly picking one of these meanings. Because I would have to come back and prove, for example, if I wanted to argue that Kemet actually means neck, that the place name Kemet actually means neck, I would have to prove that that is the case. So this is something that Diop, James P. Allen, no one has done until I've dealt with this. They just had a hypothesis and ran with it. And so this is what makes it difficult. And we can see that the same, not the same, but a similar situation exists here in Egyptian. So there's no vowels. You just have KM's sequence. But you have to complain, to make full, a temple, a book of wisdom, inhabitants of Athribis, to perform work. So how do you choose for the word Kemet itself that is spelled using these same graphemes to mean black, because there's a Kim that means black, over all of these other Kims? That's what people have yet to answer. What was your process? What was your argument? What's your proof that Kim means black versus Kim complain, or to perform, or a temple, or to make full? How come it ain't the full land? And so this is what we have to ask. So as I mentioned, like given these two examples, we see we for mummy and I, me, and then Kemet for disease and pupil. But as I have here, there's no way to distinguish these two pairs. So the Egyptians put classifiers at the end of these words to bring clarity. And so that's what we see here, with the exception of this, because this is a pronoun and pronouns don't get classifiers. Also called determinatives in Egyptian literature, but that's even incorrect. It's a classifier. So these images give us context for what word is meant. And so a disease, it wouldn't make sense with the pupil, the eye glyph, because there's no correlation between disease and eye, unless you're talking about a particular disease of the eye. And so the Egyptians had this glyph here, the AA2, to signal disease, because this is like a gland or something like this. And there's another version with some liquid and pus or something coming out of it. And so, of course, this wee mummy has a mummy at the end. This was a guy wrapped up in cloth. So we see how important this is. And this is why when we're talking about Egyptian, we have to include the classifiers. So that's why they were included in my context. So now we're going to go through the process. So step one in the process is to check the textual context of the word Kemet. So one of the things we have to understand that Kemet is a place name. It's a toponym. It's just a name of a place. And so a toponym never refers to people. And so, you know, this really just kills the argument off the top because it's a place name in terms of Kemet. It doesn't refer to people. These are the classifiers, and there are some additional ones for toponyms. A canal, pool, road, a tongue of land, irrigation land, hills, town, center, and water. All apply to lands, toponyms, spaces. And so we have this one example here from the official ONTEF. And so here's the transliteration, and here's the word Kemet inside the space here. And so it says, then I and the entire force descended to the quote unquote black land. This is from Golet's article. Without there being any retreating of any follower or the death of a great person or a little person. I reaching the black land safely because of my skill in ascending to this place. So it's letting you know that Kemet is a place. It's not describing people. So this word here is place. And so this is a word for ascending in place, set place. So this word here is referring to Kemet, this place. It's not talking about people. It's not describing the land, even though the author here put black land. It should just be Kemet, the place. And so you notice that Kemet here is written with this classifier, which is irrigated land. There are other versions with the mer with a canal glyph. And then the 049 glyph, which they say means town, but it's actually like a dam or irrigated land, just like this one. And, you know, I get into that in the book. And they're interchangeable. 049, all of these actually are interchangeable, but here's an example. In the word Sapat, Nome, Necropolis, and in District Nome. And so you see that the only thing that changes is the classifier. So no matter what, these interchange. And so I bring up, if the Egyptians wanted to use color, they would use this classifier. The D3 classifier for hair, which also means complexion, color, nature, skin of a man or a woman, as they do in this word Kim black. Now, the word isn't always written with this determinative. Sometimes you'll see it with the rolled papyrus scroll, and sometimes you won't see it with neither. But those are short forms of this large form, meaning this actually exists. And so you can play with the short forms only when this larger one exists. And so in the word Kemet, the black woman Isis, this is here. But you will never see this with any word for Kemet, meaning Egypt. And so there's another determinative that they use, or classifier, for color, and that's this N33. It's just a small little circle. It's supposed to be like a pellet, like a rock or a pellet, whatnot. It's some kind of granule material. And you see it in these words: black eye paint, or iritu, red color of plants. So they have no problem using color determinatives to denote color. But ironically, there's not one example of Kemet, the place name, with any color determinatives. This lets us know that Kemet has nothing to do with color. And so, you know, researchers have been scrambling since I've asked this question for 20 years and more, and they can't find one. And I'm not saying that one doesn't exist, but if it did exist, it would have been, researchers would have put this out there by now. But even if they found one example, what did we say earlier? One example doesn't mean anything, because it could have been a mistake by a scribe. It could just be a coincidence. That's why we look for patterns. What is the pattern of the people? What is the tradition? The tradition for the ancient Egyptians is that when they wanted to denote color or connote color, they used this grapheme or this grapheme. And so this is just reinforces that this is a canal, an irrigated canal, irrigated land, and that refers to land. So you see in the earliest representations of Kemet, they have land determinatives, irrigated land determinatives. So it lets you know right then and there that the word has to deal with irrigated land. It has to do with water or land or both. And so from a philological perspective, as we saw in this example here, this kills the argument. But we're not monolingual researchers. So we have to go beyond Egyptian to confirm this, to make sure that this is not a coincidence. And so the second step, the second step here is to check the grammar of the words themselves. So, you know, I'm reiterating some things for Dr. Ditka, you know, and anybody else who is confused on this matter, because I had to go through these things quickly, even though, you know, it took 2 hours the first time. I hope not to do that this time. But, you know, so we're going to go back to Frank Kammerzell's. He says there are not, when determining that two languages are related, he says in the first step, there are not only roots or word stems which are similar in shape and meaning, but as I have highlighted in the red, both systems also exhibit similar sets of stem extensions and or derivative affixes used on the same basis. So this is why I had this slide in my presentation. So we're not even going to deal with the root of Kemet, which we determined in the first presentation is actually Kem. So Kemet consists of Kem root plus T suffix. So we still don't know what the meaning of Kem is. So we're going to try to discover the meaning of the T and its applications. So we have to go to other languages to see if they have the same grammatical feature, because the grammatical feature may give us clues as to the root meaning and how it's applied. So almost all the time when there's a T suffix in the Egyptian literature, the researchers will argue that it is a feminine T. And I argue that it is not the case all the time. That the T is actually a noun classifier. That means it is a morpheme for classes. And I can say this definitively based on this information that we have here. So notice that the highlighted in red these morphemes. So in Egyptian, Chacon, it is a suffix T, but in Chiluba, a Bantu language out of Central Africa, the prefix is chi. That's how you pronounce it, chi. So in Egyptian, you have MMT, an edible plant and its fruits. In Chiluba, you have chimuma, fruit, orange, fetus. You have this word mother. Some pronounce it mut, but it should be, there are vowels in between here, so it's not mut. But in Chiluba, chimamu, chimawu, my mother, mom, maternal aunt. Pipette, a plant. Chipupu, foliage, plant. So the graphemes match in every single one of these representations. And so everywhere we see these words here, and this cognate over here in Egyptian, excuse me, in Chiluba, we also see a grammatical morpheme where suffix in Egyptian, prefixed in Chiluba. And so another test that we can do, because this is what the tests are in our scientific method, our process, is that this grammatical morpheme should be present in a word that is not cognate, or at least doesn't share the same consonant sequence in both languages. So just as an example, this word jirit, wall, floor, has the same grammatical morpheme as Chiluba for their word for wall, dirt, road, clay, floor. So we're not arguing that the roots here are cognate, but we're arguing that the grammatical morphemes are cognate. So with Egyptian still being studied and not fully understood, we understand Chiluba very well. And so if this morpheme is corresponding here, then in Egyptian, it has to be the same morpheme. And so this morpheme is a nominal prefix in Chiluba. It's a class prefix. And so we continue our discussion. In the Chiluba language, that chi is for a whole bunch of different issues, but it also includes place names or names that have to deal with some kind of geographical space, a region or area, some location. And so Chiminga, city, town, urban center. Chipapu, flat surface, region. Chikulu, site of an abandoned village. Chikumba, Chikumbi has to say a stable, a barn, and also the word for fence. Chijwaya, tomb, grave. In Kiswahili, this chi is ki. So you say Kijiji, village, for example. So this is a noun classifier. It denotes place. But the classifier for place also doubles as the classifier for the abstract. And this is going to be important. So in Egyptian, remember, we've already matched between Chiluba and Egyptian these morphemes to words. So so we already proved here in Chiluba that this morpheme also goes on places, geographical spaces. And so the same thing here in Egyptian. So a place, domicile, city, town, all terminated with T, because it is a suffix for place. It's not just a random feminine suffix. And so just like in, for example, we look at the same words, Chikumbi, stable, and fence. Shemimet, stable, storehouse. It uses the exact same grammatical morpheme. So we add a third language because 3 sets the pattern. So we have Egyptian. We already proved in Egyptian and Chiluba this pattern. And so we see the same pattern in Sumerian. So Sumerian has key, just like Kiswahili has key for place. And as I said, it doubles as the abstract. And so just like we have key in Duru, a disease, but the key is not talking about there's a disease place. It doubles as the abstract. So in Chiluba, their word for bila, for to be sick and suffering, they prefix it with a word for place. This literally means a place. And it doubles as the abstract and gives you the word for disease, sickness. So we see typologically the same process in Chiluba as in Sumerian. And it makes sense because they're related languages. And so a stool, but more so like here in the harvest area, rebel land, a road path, grave, just like in Chiluba. And even here, igud, ox, barn. So this barn here is a stable. And so you have this actually in two forms, in key, and then the key is lost, and you have e. So e good. This is the same. This is a reduced form of key. So it's the same prefix in Sumerian. So now let's demonstrate. Remember the principle of transitivity we talked about. If A equals B and B equals C, therefore A equals C. That's the principle of transitivity. And so we see here in Sumerian, words with the same meaning have the same prefix as the ones in Chiluba. So the word for fence has that prefix just like in Chiluba. The word for grave has this prefix just like in Chiluba. The word for an abandoned village or a wasteland has the same prefix, just a reduced form. And in Kiswahili, Kijiji for village, in their form, they have Iduru village. Again, it's the same form, reduced form. So, so this is scientifically established that they're the same. So this prefix for place and things in Sumerian is the same prefix in Chiluba, and it's the same prefix in Egyptian. We have established this as a scientific fact. And so we go further just for overkill to make sure that the sound correspondences match. And so we already denoted that this suffix of place, T suffix of place, is equal to key, place, ground, earth, land. But these are both reduced forms of what we say ter or ta, as in ta, Mary, and then ker, kir, underworld, land, country, earth, land, country, farmland, buildable land. So in the grammar, it lets you know that these are the parts. And so an extra form, to burn. We see the same consonant sequence, ker, to burn, to alight. So Egyptian T corresponds with Sumerian K, just as Egyptian T corresponds to Chiluba Chi. And so these are the same. And so there's no way around this. So we've established the fact and establishes the ground on the grammatical plane. So going back, actually, I don't even think I have to go all the way back because it should be the next slide. So we check now the putative cognate sets. So remember, we established this here, that both systems also exhibit similar sets of stem extensions and or derivative affixes used on the same basis. That is a scientific fact. We have established that. There's no way around it. So now we go to the next step, step 3, which is to check the putative cognate sets. So remember that series of cognates with the same consonant structure that we talked about. In either system, there are similar groups of semantically distinct lexemes. That's why I said this is discrete mathematics. They're distinct lexemes which share the same phonological shape or matching groups of the same phonological distinct lexemes having the same meaning. The probability that two distinct languages denote these meanings by means of the same root independently from each other is extremely small. So we're setting up the statistical analysis. So that's what I did here. So our brother Ned or Nev says that I just randomly chose a meaning coming from Sumerian. That is not the case at all. I established the scientific fact here. So wherever you see, for example, Sumerian, the consonant sequence DN or DL or DR in Sumerian, it coincides with KM in Egyptian, and in Chiluba, KS, KL, KB, or JM or KL or JM. The Chiluba is a living language, and it has been evolving. So the second consonant has evolved more than what we captured in Sumerian, in Egyptian, 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. So what we see on the right here is understandable. But for those who are familiar with phonology, you know that these sounds correspond to each other in a very unique way. And in the actual book, I demonstrate where all of these correspond. So these aren't random. But notice that wherever Sumerian D is in the initial position, Chiluba also has K, just like Egyptian has K. So these are consistent. And the meanings match up for each one. So sound meaning correspondences, we are set. This is scientifically established. And so we should note that in Sumerian, N, L, and R interchange, which makes sense given these are homoorganic sounds. And B is a allophone of M. So it's not a surprise that you would see B and M as in Mary is an allophone with N as in Nancy. And they correspond. So that's why you see these here and why you see the same thing with the B's and M's and in these positions here in the second position. All of this can be explained by means of sound rules. And so it should be noted that D and T correspond in Sumerian as well. So we can do the same consonant sequence. Instead of DR and DL, we can do TR and TL. And they will all still match up with KM in Egyptian and KL and KM in Chiluba. And so, again, all of this scientifically established. You can pause, and you can go through all the meanings. They're all within the same matrix. And so there's no way around this. So now, step 4 in the scientific process, we analyze the data and we make a conclusion. So now, what we have established is that Sumerian D corresponds to Egyptian K and Chiluba K. That Sumerian T also corresponds to Egyptian K and Chiluba K and S. Sumerian in the second consonant position, R and L both correspond to M, and L and M and MB and B in Chiluba. Why do I have these highlighted red? We established this fact because if we're going to find a cognate, for example, for the word Kim in Kemet in in Sumerian, let me take this back. Yeah. So if we're going to find a KM correspondence in Sumerian, it's either going to be DR, DL, or TR, TL primarily. So I have these highlighted Not only that, because remember in our initial equation, we had to also correspond with the determinative or the classifier. So this is a canal, and we know the other version with irrigated land. So what word in Sumerian with a DR or TL construct that matches KM, also with the grammatical prefix of key that matches the T suffix in Kemet, what word in Sumerian has every single correspondence that we've established above? There's one word, Kiduru, damp ground, irrigable land. This is how you write it in the cuneiform script. And so all of our equation has been satisfied. Form and meaning. We did the cognate sets. The cognate sets are true. And we in this U here, that the word in language B, in this case Sumerian, matches up with the classifier or the determinative of language A, which is Egyptian. This is why we establish these formulas, so we have something to go back on to check and measure our results against. So now we know what the meaning of Kim means. It means wet, irrigated, damp, and fresh, just like the root of this word in Sumerian. And so now we can properly define Kemet as damp ground, irrigable land, based on our analysis of Sumerian. It's essentially farmland or riparian land. Again, everything matches. Key, T, the DR, KM, everything matches, including the analysis of the determinatives, the classifiers. So, you know, again, we're looking for patterns. So can we do the same thing with Chiluba? And so Chiluba here, we set up the series of correspondences. K, K. M is in Mary and Ind in Chiluba. For each word here. That's why we can define Kemet, the country, irrigated land, the nation, and match it up with Chiluba, Chiankanda, piece of land, field, part of a field being plowed in a day. You don't plow the desert. You plow fertile land, land with water on it. Everything's a match. So we have this word Nkanda in various forms across Africa. And in the Herero language, the word Oenganda, which is cognate with Chiankanda in Chiluba, means village, but properly a new pasturage with an abundance of grass and water. Again, what is this we see at the end of the word Kemet? Water. Everything matches. This is why we do the analysis of the other languages. And so this is what we see. Even this is a water glyph. And I get into that in the book. This is not some random streets that the Egyptologists have said. And so this is even disputed in Egyptology. And I cite sources that argue against that interpretation, in which we can demonstrate via what we just did that this is water. These are water channels. This is a dam-like situation. So we have three witnesses based on the scientific and comparative method. Kemet, a pasturage with an abundance of grass and water. Sumerian, Kiduru, damp ground, irrigable land. Chiluba, Chiankanda, piece of land, field, part of a land being plowed in a day. In other words, farmland. Everything scientifically established. So here's some other forms of the word Kemet in African languages. Farm, Ecom, with this be Chicom, farm, com, Indian, all these are farm. A polis, a polity, country, region, city, rural area, village, city. Land which grows warm and healthily cultivated. These are the languages here on the side. So when you see the Kemet with the people determinatives, it doesn't mean black people. It just denotes a polity, a polis, a region, a country. That's why when we read it in the text in the way that we did, which we'll see further below, that this is exactly the case. So when we look at, for example, Netter Nebs, he does none of this. And he makes up arguments too. And so there is no Kim2 black people in the Egyptian language. They don't even render this in any of the dictionaries. And not saying that you can't go against the dictionaries, but this is something he made up without any formal proof. There is no demotic Kimi dark-skinned person. He made that up. Copy, there is no Kimi the black person. Even in Nubian or Dogon, none of these. You have to add a word for person along with black so black can describe the noun, which is the person. So it's just bad scholarship. He does not do the scientific method. So answering the question for Brother Ditka, Dr. Ditka, you know, we're not using the same methods. He's not using the grounded method. He can't demonstrate anything using the method that he's using. And here goes some more stuff. So here, this is what he's attempting to do. He says that there's a root Kim that means black. Doesn't demonstrate that this is the meaning at all. Does no proof, nothing. He just assumes that Kim black is the root, and then he bases his argument on that assumption. No scientific method whatsoever. So then he gets this version of the word, and he says that this means Kim2 blacks. No demonstration whatsoever. So he's trying to say that Kim, and then this describes Kim people. So this must mean black people. So now he's saying that this irrigated land, so this is supposed to be Kim black land. And so with the merglyph, notice he didn't put the merglyph. So now he's had to argue that it means black water. He doesn't put that version up here because it wouldn't make any sense. And none of these make sense. And so this representation is just totally wrong altogether. And so he's going through a separate debate right now on Facebook on how to properly render the plural. And so he's trying to say that this is plural. This is not plural. And as I discussed in the last presentation, these three strokes act as the abstract. And I demonstrated this is an abstract. So these people represent a nation, a family. This is an abstract concept of a nation. You don't read this as the people. If they wanted to render this the people of Kemet, they would have rendered it Kemet TU. There's another grapheme for that. But those who are laypersons and don't know Egyptian, you'll be fooled by him because he doesn't understand these principles. And so here's another slide of his where he just does the same thing. Kim2 black. So this is not what this, you don't even see this here. He just makes this up. And notice, remember in this slide, he tried to argue that these words mean black people by themselves. But you see here, he has to, for example, in Dogon, to say black person, he has to include the root for person. So Gim under itself doesn't mean black people. I have Dogon and been working with Dogon languages for the longest. And Gim itself, or Jim, how it's also pronounced, does not mean black person. So this is an error. You will not find a dictionary where you would see representations like that, where just Jim means black person. or even in these other languages, in Nubian and Dinka, Kikongo, you know, you have to see, like, for example, this mu here in Black people is a prefix for person. If it was Black people, it would be ba or wa as far as a prefix. So it's just stuff he just doesn't understand. And so even here, he just misrepresents the data here. So he translates this as he came after assuming dominion over the inhabitants of Egypt. Because he sees people here, he automatically thinks he's speaking to people. There's nothing in the grammar here that says that this is the case. In fact, this is how you properly render that this line here. So here's the transliteration of the graphemes. It says, he came and caused the nation of Kemet to live. Came, he, live, past tense, him. Oh, I'm sorry. This is all unk. This is caused to live, unk. I mean, here's the past tense int with the f suffix he. Kemet, singular, the nation of Kemet to live. Not the blacks, there's no plural. This is a determinative, this is a classifier. It is not a grammatical morpheme in the language. And so we have here this suffix s, its affliction. So remember, like the first rendering that we showed in the grammar, excuse me, in the primary text, that the word referred to Kemet as a place. So this is referring to a place, its. And so the s pronominal suffix on the word shinu is a third person feminine singular pronoun. It anaphorically refers back here to the place, refers back to its antecedent, which is the word Kemet, and agrees with it in gender and number. So it's a singular. So you can't say the inhabitants. That's plural. That's people. And he put here an S Egypts. What do you mean, what Egypts? So he's just all over the place. He doesn't know what he's talking about, which is a feminine singular. The word Kemet in this text is not feminine plural and would not be rendered Kemet would or the made up Kim 2. So this Kim 2 that he has here is just something he made up. It's not in the grammar. And so if we were to argue that Kemet was a plural, a feminine plural suffix, I mean a feminine plural rendering, it would be rendered WT, not TW. And so he's making all kinds of videos and posts trying to argue the contrary. And he's just all over the place. And so this is my last slide. And I think it's, yeah, for the most part, it's my last slide. So if we are to use his logic that this word Kemet, and this is the logic of Diop, or even the Egyptologists when they refer to land, that the word Kim root land describes the determinative or the classifiers here. If that is the case, it should be consistent. Remember, we're talking about tradition, patterns, regularity. It should be consistent in the language. So we have this word, for example, haret, which means a fish gnome. This is the word for fish. And you can see it's the classifier is the 049 glyph, so we know that this is a place. So this rendering comes from page 884 of the dictionary. What dictionary is that? The Coffin Text, the Coffin Text dictionary. And so if we was to use this logic, if we suffix or if we replace the 049 glyph with the A1 and B1 and Z2 glyphs here with this word here, would you translate this then as the fish people with the logic used to argue for black people in the word for Kemet? It makes no sense because this word doesn't describe the people. You can't call these people simultaneously people and fish. So it's not fish people. It makes no sense. And so it's the same thing when you're dealing with the word Kemet that has this determinative, excuse me, this series of classifiers. It's talking about a location, a polity. That's all this combination means. The polity of Haret, the polity of Kemet. That's it. That's all. It's nothing major. And so these are the kinds of things that we are able to establish when we do the scientific and the comparative method. So I went longer than I intended. And so I got to really figure out a way to, reduce this time. But so I'm going to go back if I can and stop the presentation. So what's this light here? So hopefully y'all can see me better. So I hope this has been informative and that you are a little bit more clear on the methods that is used and the citations that are used in there. So this is for your edification. Go back and review if you're not familiar with at least me and this method and things of this nature. So to answer your question, Dr. Ditka, no, we're not doing the same thing. And so it's impossible for him to do the comparative method and the scientific method and come to the conclusion that he did. And so all of the other stuff that I do is just extra experiments. And no matter what experiment that I do, they all come back to the same conclusion. And so I can definitively say that Kemet does not mean black land or black people, that it is a riparian land, an irrigated land. That's all it is. It's a locality. It's land with water in it and a river running through it. That's it. And so, and again, all this is detailed in the chapter, and it will be available, in 2019. And so there's more stuff. And so like this isn't even the half. And so I made sure that I was thorough. So no matter what argument that you tried to throw at me, these steps have taken care of that and answered all those questions. And so I appreciate everyone for tuning in, those who are tuning in live. I haven't been paying attention to the into the chat room, and I see that they're having their own conversations over here. I don't see any questions or anything to that nature, at least apparently. And they're arguing over a principle. If A equals B and B equals C, then C, that's a totally different thing. No, that's not necessarily the case. Picasso, that's a different formula because you're saying A times B. And if A equals B and B equals C, then C equals AB. So you have to be clear on that in the way that you word it. But the principle of transitivity is if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. It's just that simple. And so they're trying to have a mathematical argument. And it just looks like too much for me to really kind of go through now. So I'll just end it. And I appreciate everyone for listening. Thank you all. Please share, continue the discussion, and hopefully this has helped us to become a little bit more rigorous and better in our analysis. And so my whole book is just using analysis just like this on different questions. And so we have to be a bit more rigorous and more scientific in the way that we deal with ancient African history. So thank you for your time. Love you all. Y'all have a good Thursday and the rest of the week. And I will see you somewhere in social media land. All right. Hotep, peace.